Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call to order this joint session of the Audit Committee and the Education and Culture Committee. This afternoon, first I'm going to go through how this committee session is going to work before starting remarks. So the Audit Committee consists of myself. I'm Kate Stewart. I'm the chair of the Audit Committee and the Council Vice President. It also includes Council President Friedson and Councilmember Katz. Also, we have the Education Committee and Culture Committee, who we are doing this committee session with this afternoon. That is chaired by Councilmember Jawando and is joined by Councilmembers Mink and Albornoz. And we are joined by other members of our council, given the gravity of the issues we are discussing today. First, I just want to set how we got here. I think most people know, but just in case you don't, there were multiple investigations launched after the Washington Post published an investigation in August that revealed a former principal, Joe Beidelman, was the subject of reports alleging sexual harassment, bullying, and retaliation. These reports date back to 2016. While he was under investigation, he was promoted to become principal of Paint Branch High School. We are here today to receive the Inspector General's report from January 23rd, 2024, which focused on MCPS's general processes involving complaint handling and investigations of employee misconduct. We will discuss these findings. Representatives from the Board of Education and MCP leadership are also here to address them. And I'm sure we will discuss other events that led up to this report in January and events since the release of the report. How we're going to work the session today. After my remarks, I will turn it over to Chair Jawando for his opening remarks. Then we will hear from our Inspector General. Next, I will turn it over to President Silvestri from the Board of Education, and then turn it over to MCPS leadership. After that, I will turn to my colleagues on the council. We will first start with the committee members of the Audit and Education and Culture Committees, and then turn it to other council members. Each council member will have a total of 5 minutes to have comments and pose questions, and to have responses of either the Inspector General, Board of Education, or MCPS leadership. So that's 5 minutes in totality. We will we'll go through one round, and then if colleagues still have questions, we will go through another round of comments and questions, and then we will close. With having that out of the way, I just want to say that we are here today because our residents, our employees of the school district, and the county council deserve transparency and demonstrated accountability. The Inspector General, and before her, the report from Jackson Lewis, unearthed disturbing findings with regards to the case of Joel Beidelman and the complaints and promotion processes at MCPS. In the report we will discuss today, what is particularly disturbing is that the investigation found that problems and deficiencies with the systems have been raised by other outside entities for years, but no action had been taken. While the County Council does not have direct authority over the school system, and there is an elected school board, I want to note that last year this council did increase the resources for the Inspector General's office, specifically to provide that office more capacity to review and audit the processes at MCPS. And I am glad we did so. By having this committee session for all to watch, our goal is to ensure transparency and accountability to make sure that changes will take place. In addition, by having the Inspector General report and have her office involved, we have a mechanism independent of MCPS and the board to check on the progress of the changes that need to be made. I also want to say that while there may be disagreements today as we move forward, I know that each of us wants to ensure that we are centering the needs of our children and those who work for our schools. Because when the systems and processes fail, they are the ones most harmed. And now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Chair Jawando.
Thank you, Chair Stewart, Vice President Stewart. Thank you all for being here today. As was mentioned, we're here to talk about the specific challenges MCPS and the Board of Education have faced in handling complaints addressing employee misconduct. And as I ask my questions and make my remarks today, I'm seeking as I hope we all are, to correct the deficiencies and hear about the plans to correct the deficiencies in the report and to strengthen the focus on the mission of MCPS. I urge all of my colleagues and the public to be engaged in this conversation from an asset-framed mindset. I believe we must frame today's conversation through acknowledging the many strengths of MCPS. We just talked about some of them in the workforce development area upstairs, while engaging in creative and positive problem solving for what are significant challenges. I believe there's power in understanding people and systems through both their strengths, aspirations, accomplishments, and weaknesses. And while we seek to better understand the challenges before MCPS and the board, in the issues and errors that have led to today, I urge all of us to remember that we are also seeking to chart a path to a brighter and better future. As a former MCPS student, a parent of current MCPS students, and the chair of the Education Committee and council member, I've experienced the school system from a lot of different ways over the last 40 plus years and witnessed firsthand the great parts of the system and the not so great parts of the system. But we have to be relentless in offering solutions. I really appreciate the IG, who we'll hear from today, for their work to not only identify problems, but outline potential solutions. Just a little context. Our system's been around since 1860. Since that time, we've changed quite a bit. We've had 23 superintendents. 22 have been men. Now 2 have been women in interim. And our first African-American superintendent was Paul Vance in 1991. And 30 years later, Dr. McKnight became the second black person and first woman appointed interim superintendent. So as we seek to understand what's transpired and correct the failures, let's remember that they are systemic and complex. I want to make sure we commit our energies to those solutions today. We're the largest school district in Maryland, the 15th largest in the country, serving 160,000 students, 211 schools. 75% of our students are students of color. The mission of MCPS is to give all of them opportunity and to protect those employees so they can do that for all of our students. In the last decade, MCPS has had 4 different superintendents. And as the OIG report indicates, there have been at least 3 organizational restructures as part of the MCPS central office. As we've asked our teachers and administrators to do more and more to address the social and emotional challenges of hunger and poverty and violence, it's become harder to do that work. Since the start of this term on the EC Committee, we have called for more transparency and accountability. It was our first request of the board and the MCPS and my act as chair. I appreciate the board's work with us to improve that process. During the September 28th meeting of Jackson Lewis report, we learned about many policy deficiencies, inadequate archiving of emails, and lack of resources to support board members in the deliberations. Since then, we've heard some reports of corrective action, some of which we'll talk about today. We recently called for the full release of an unredacted or dramatically less redacted Jackson Lewis report, which unfortunately was just sent to us at 2 p.m. today. President Silvestri has indicated in a press conference that the board will update the Inspector General and us on their progress. We appreciate that collaboration. The need for transparency and accountability remains paramount, and we look forward to getting towards that more and more today. Thank you, Chair Stewart.
Thank you. Now I would like to ask Ms. Lamarzi, our Inspector General, to come down and provide her report. Thank you, Ms. Lamarzi, for coming back to the Audit Committee and to this joint committee. And I do want to say thank you to the entire school board for attending the meeting today. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Chair Stewart, Chair Jawando, members of the council, thank you for inviting me here this afternoon to share with you the results of the work that has been done by our office. As I told you back in September, and I've reiterated to the Audit Committee this fall, addressing the issues at MCPS that have arisen this fall were the priority of our office. We worked stridently to deliver to this community independent, unbiased analysis, a report that is based on facts without agenda, and something that you and the board and MCPS and our community can rely on to make changes that are actually going to take effect and improve the situation. Since July of 2023, so this first half of the fiscal year of 24, my office has received 92 complaints related to MCPS. That's 40% of all complaints that we've received on our hotline. We devoted over 3,300 hours of staff time to investigating and responding to all of the complaints that have come in. We conducted 62 investigative interviews and reviewed and analyzed 623 documents. It has been an undertaking that we have taken very seriously, and I have been committed the entire time to making sure that our staff was laser focused on providing answers in a responsible and reasonable amount of time. Chair Stewart began to talk a little bit about how we got where we are, but I thought I would just step back for a moment and go through the chronology of what has occurred. On August 11th of 2023, the Washington Post published their first article reporting that MCPS had promoted Dr. Joel Beitelman to be principal at Paint Branch High School, despite receiving numerous allegations of harassment and bullying against him. In response, the board hired Jackson Lewis, a law firm, to investigate the Beitelman promotion and to assess the promotion process at MCPS. That investigation was completed and a report was issued to the board on September 8th. The board later released a public synopsis on September 14th, and a redacted copy of the full report was released in October, and apparently another one this afternoon that I just learned of as well. Based upon the chronology of events and the decisions that were made by the board and MCPS early on, our office had to wait until Jackson Lewis completed their investigation so we could make sure we identified areas that we could have an impact on by looking at. So on September 20th, as you know, we announced the initiation of two separate engagements. One was the investigation of allegations that had been received since July of 2023 regarding Dr. Beitelman, and any previously received allegations that we determined had not yet been investigated. We also opened a review of MCPS's process for receiving and responding to misconduct allegations against MCPS employees. We did not look at the promotion process again because that had been the focus of Jackson Lewis's report. On December 1st, we issued our first memorandum of investigation, which concluded that Dr. Beitelman had violated the sexual harassment and workplace bullying policies of MCPS, as well as the code of conduct. On January 10th, we issued a second memorandum of investigation. I told you we've received a lot of complaints over the course of the last several months. We spent a great deal of time. We responded and analyzed every single one of those, and one came from the school system that was referred to us about misconduct by senior officials. We were unable to substantiate those specific allegations, due in part to lack of cooperation from some of the witnesses, but we did identify actions aligned with our statutory requirement. We are required to identify ways to enhance effectiveness and efficiency in the operations of MCPS. And so we published a report that made some recommendations for policy changes at MCPS related to disclosure of previous romantic and sexual relationships for anyone in a chain. Right now, the policy only requires that you disclose if you have a current relationship with someone in your chain, not if you had a previous relationship. And we observed that that would go a long way towards increasing transparency at MCPS. We also recommended a policy change that would require cooperation and truthfulness during investigations, which aligns with what Montgomery County has of its employees in our personnel regulations. And then the last, as you see, engagement that we issued, the report on was just most recently on January 24th, which was a review of the process for handling complaints of misconduct. The objective of that engagement was to assess whether MCPS had effective processes and procedures for the receipt, assignment, investigation, referral, resolution, documentation, and retention of allegations of misconduct by its employees. The central goal of my office is to do work that is relevant, that is impactful, that can lead to actionable change. And so we looked at the broader question that probably was underlying a lot of what was happening this fall, which was the handling of the Beitelman investigations and allegations unique, or was that indication of a systemic problem? And as you've now seen from the results of our report, we found numerous issues and systematic deficiencies in the way that MCPS handled allegations. The scope of that engagement ran from July 1st of 2020 through September 20th of 2023. So we're looking at files and policies that were in place during that time period. For background, we did learn that MCPS receives a lot of complaints through a number of different channels. So complaints can come in through 4 different departmental emails. Someone could email a principal directly, or a supervisor, or an administrator. You could email DCI, the Department of Compliance and Investigations. There are forms that are available online that folks can fill out. And MCPS has 2 external online reporting sites. They're called Lighthouse and Safe Schools. Both of those are actually designed to receive anonymous complaints. So they have options where a complainant can give their identifying information. They also have an option where you can agree to be contacted by MCPS but maintain your anonymity so that you're contacted through that system. When we got started, we wanted to see just how many complaints had MCPS received during that scope period. And out of the gate, we learned that there was no centralized or searchable database for us to find details and actions that have been taken with all of the complaints. Lots of people, I told you, get those complaints in, and each person, each department has a different way of handling it. Only they decide how or if it will be documented, how to maintain the information, who it may or may not be referred to. DCI wasn't always made aware of complaints that came in. I've mentioned DCI, Department of Compliance Investigations. That is the unit that is predominantly charged with investigating misconduct by employees. But as we dug deeper, we learned they have a large portfolio of things that they are required to look at as well. You see on the slide there a listing through of all of these other areas. They investigate Title II, 7, and 9 allegations. They support the Office of General Counsel with litigation and background checks, process requests for ADA accommodation, which we understand has grown. The number of those complaints has grown, and requests for accommodation have grown enormously since COVID at MCPS. And they serve as a representative to Child Protective Services, law enforcement, the state's attorney's office, a very, very wide range of activity. The review as a whole resulted in 5 findings, and they were in 2 general areas. The first was the area for processing complaints. A complaint is made, what happens next? And the other 3 findings are related to the handling of the investigation. So starting in the first group, we found that there was no comprehensive protocol for addressing the receipt, evaluation and tracking, and the disposition of complaints, and that DCI did not follow defined criteria when determining what actions they were going to take. By not having a protocol, it lends itself to inconsistencies in the way that things are handled, inequities in the way things are handled, and it really can sow distrust among the community. And without criteria to determine what actions should be taken, you're less likely to see documentation in files or consistency in process, and you may miss important steps of a process, like not consulting with the Title IX coordinator. So part of this is you have to really have a well-trained staff that's experienced, that maintains records and data, so when you have something you can look in and say, how did we handle that before? And those are all missing in terms of how to handle when you get that complaint. Not every complaint that comes in requires an investigation. Some things can be referred to someone else. Maybe it's strictly a personnel matter. Maybe it needs to go to a different department because a student is involved. But once DCI has that complaint and determines they're going to open an investigation, you need to have comprehensive policies for conducting and documenting those investigations. You need to make sure that you can show that there was care and diligence taken in performing those investigations, which means you are thoroughly documenting. You are drawing conclusions that are supported, well supported by facts that have been gathered. And so our findings were that there had not been comprehensive policies, that the electronic case files lacked evidence that DCI had continually followed the sound investigative practices that we would expect to see. There was no database. So when we wanted to find files to test and see how complaints are handled, we had to use just a listing of all of the electronic files that DCI has. Those didn't have identifiers to know what kind of file they were, if they were investigations, if they were child protective service items, if they were issues with ADA compliance or accommodation. So we had to sample a very large number of those files. It was 817 electronic files. We sampled 10% of those. We were able to determine, based on our review of what was in the files, that probably about 27% of them appeared to be related to investigations. And of those 27, 60% lacked at least some of the basic things we expected to see in files. 27% of them lacked documentation of just the final resolution. What actually happened at the end? The last finding has been talked about already by the chairs, which is that there had been 4 previous examinations of the complaint handling process at DCI that had not been acted upon and are consistent with a number of the things that we found and what we've made recommendations for. The report details 5 recommendations for improvement: implementing policies and procedures in regards to the receipt and processing of complaints, and formalizing procedures so that there is strict criteria for how to handle complaints when they come in. And then in terms of investigations, implementing policies and procedures that relate to conducting and documenting DCI investigations, and evaluating. We encourage MCPS and the board to reevaluate DCI's role, assess their staffing and training needs, that large portfolio of items and issues that they are covering, and then to have stricter oversight of that division. And lastly, to evaluate those previous findings in the 4 other products that are there, as well as our recommendations. DCI really does need to be fully reviewed. Review their mission, their staffing, how the staff is trained, the reporting structures. MCPS has a lot of information in those 4 documents. They are very comprehensive, and a lot of work has been done at no further cost. So those are a gold mine of information for actions that can be taken. I know a lot of questions will now come up: what happens next? As the audit committee knows well, because we talked about it this fall, our office has a robust follow-up process that we have resuscitated and we have formalized in this last year. That process requires the subject of our engagements to provide an update on the status of corrective actions every 90 days. So we will send out a format that we have them use, and they will give us an update. That leads to a lot of questions that we ask. We may request documents. We've started that process already, actually. The schools put out a revised corrective action plan at the end of January. We've already made some document requests to just sort of see what they were talking about in there. And we'll continue to track that. The status of our recommendations is always included in the back of our annual report, so that's always public. We also will be issuing status reports this year. By at the middle of the year or so, we expect to do status reports on the status of corrective actions in our engagements. And the last piece of follow-up is, ultimately, we may go back and do a follow-up review where we would actually test the corrective actions that have been put in place and see if they did what everyone thought they would do. Have things been improved, or what it looked like on paper would work, in actuality hasn't been working quite yet. So that's the way that our process works. Our objective, of course, is to have recommendations closed out within a year of the issuance of our report. sometimes it is trial and error, and there are some things that can happen quickly and some things that take a little bit of time. I will just say that buying new software and hiring facilitators and having focus groups and bringing in experts are all a start to addressing issues that have come out of these reports, but it really is going to take a rebuilding of the entire process. And it's going to be work to think through how that complaint process works. What happens from the moment someone puts their trust out there and voices their concerns to that last moment where the chief of HR has to make a determination of discipline, perhaps. It's a full process that really does need evaluation, and there are a lot of factors that go into it. So it will take time that will have to be invested in order for confidence to be restored and to ensure that the employees are protected. I'm happy to take any questions now or whenever you want. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lamarzi. I think we're going to wait for questions, but we appreciate it. And I do want to say, if we go back to the last slide, we have all received many questions on, why is this different than prior iterations of information that the MCPS has received about its processes. And this slide is why it is different, because we had the Inspector General do this report, and we'll continue to be looking at and updating us on how things are going. So thank you for this, and we will have you back in a little bit. Next, I want to ask President Silvestri, the Board of Education President, to come up and give her presentation.
Good afternoon, Chair Stewart and Chair Jawando, members of the County Council. As you are aware, we shared a summary review of the events that led to the IG undertaking her review, what we have learned through this process, and how we have held people accountable as a result during the Board of Education's meeting on Tuesday. But I want to spend a few minutes giving a brief overview of that summary so that we can all start from the same place of understanding today. Some of my previous speakers have already touched on some of these points. As you heard, on June 27, 2023, the nomination of Dr. Joel Beitelman to serve as the next principal of Paint Branch High School was brought to the board in the normal course of business, and the appointment was approved by the board. On August 4th, 2023, 5 weeks later, the board learned that Dr. Beitelman had been under investigation at the time he was promoted in June. This was the first time the board heard about this. On August 11th, 2023, the Washington Post published an article that claimed that in addition to being under investigation at the time of his promotion, many teachers had made sexual harassment claims against Dr. Beitelman over many years. The scope of allegations was again news for the board. Following these revelations, MCPS engaged the law firm Jackson Lewis to investigate the Beitelman promotion process with board oversight. The Jackson Lewis report presented on September 8, 2023 concluded that Dr. Beitelman was promoted while he was being investigated by MCPS because key decision makers did not exercise enough diligence to ascertain important details about the investigation. Specifically, multiple members of the administration who were part of the promotion process knew that Dr. Beitelman was under an active investigation at the time of his promotion. Those individuals did not inquire about the specific nature of the allegations against Dr. Beitelman, including their disposition. After Dr. Beitelman's promotion, key MCPS leaders failed to take any remedial action and failed to promptly notify the board once they knew specific details about the allegations against Dr. Beitelman and the disposition of the investigation. Key members of MCPS leadership learned details about the pending MCPS investigation and the disposition of that investigation by July 19, 2023, but did not share that information with the board until on or about August 4, 2023. There is no evidence that the board was aware of the pending MCPS investigation, the disposition of that investigation, and/or any other allegations relating to Dr. Beidelman prior to its June 27, 2023 promotional decision. MCPS's promotion process does not have a mechanism to automatically identify whether a candidate for promotion or transfer is under investigation. All relevant former complaints were investigated and addressed by MCPS, but there was evidence that MCPS has longstanding practices and processes in place that resulted in anonymous and informal complaints not being formally investigated. Specifically, MCPS did not formally investigate by interviewing witnesses, interviewing the accused, or rendering a written determination pursuant to its policies any of the multiple relevant anonymous complaints that it received. Many of those anonymous complaints contain sufficient details to enable MCPS to initiate a formal investigation pursuant to its policies and procedures for investigating complaints against staff. MCPS similarly failed to formally investigate informal complaints that were brought to it by witnesses that were interviewed in connection with all irrelevant formal complaint. MCPS typically does not formally investigate these types of informal complaints unless the alleged victim files a formal complaint under its policies. On September 8, 2023, was the first time that the board had ever been briefed regarding large-scale failings within DCI, Department of Compliance and Investigations. While Jackson Lewis's investigation was ongoing, board leadership met with both the Montgomery County Inspector General and the State Inspector General to keep them apprised of the timeline of Jackson Lewis's work and to discuss requests from the public for an Inspector General to investigate additional matters. While the board understands that the Inspectors General have complete autonomy regarding what investigations they undertake, the board wanted to ensure that the Inspectors General knew that the board and MCPS would be completely supportive if they chose to investigate. Following the release of the Jackson Lewis report, MCPS, directed by the board, shared documentation and information with the Montgomery County Inspector General to review as she analyzed what, if any, investigations she would undertake. On September 20th, 2023, the Montgomery County Inspector General notified the board that she would undertake an investigation into both specific allegations against Dr. Beidelman and MCPS's processes for receiving and responding to allegations of misconduct against school system employees. On December 1st, 2023, the Office of the Inspector General released its report regarding misconduct allegations against Dr. Beidelman. That investigation substantiated violations of MCPS's Code of Conduct and sexual harassment and workplace bullying policies. On January 23, 2024, the Office of the Inspector General released its report regarding the MCPS complaint processing. The results of that report are being discussed today and were alarming. Again, of significant concern, the report found that MCPS had been put on notice of the deficiencies in DCI, but had failed to implement appropriate corrective actions. During the months-long investigation by the OIG, the board was committed to ensuring that she had the full cooperation of MCPS and worked with the administration to confirm it was providing any and all relevant information to the IG. Additionally, the board requested and obtained copies of documentation regarding human resources that was shared with the OIG to inform policy development. In response to those requests, in late November and early December, the board received copies of a July 2019 investigation by a private law firm and a January 2022 MCPS OHRD review of DCI, which are both referenced in the OIG's report. It was only at that time that the board learned that the system had been on notice of the significant deficiencies within DCI. So where does this leave us? First, the board will oversee and ensure that all corrective actions recommended by the OIG are taken. As agreed with the OIG, the board will update the OIG every 90 days on progress toward fully implementing their recommendations. In addition, We intend to work with the administration to bring a team of external human resources experts to help us ensure that we are implementing best practices in restructuring DCI going forward. We will also do a comprehensive review of policies to ensure we have strong and robust reporting structures and processes. Finally, we will increase oversight by bringing this topic back to the board regularly and starting at the April 23rd, 2024 board meeting. We have also heard your calls for transparency, and we understand. We agree that for a school system to be successful, its stakeholders must have confidence and trust in the system. Part of building that confidence and trust is being honest about the system's failings and acknowledging the improvements that must be made. On October 11th, 2023, we released a redacted version of the Jackson-Lewis report so that the MCPS community could have a better understanding of Jackson-Lewis's findings. That report was redacted in compliance with the Maryland Public Information Act. The report contains personnel information about MCPS employees, including those who may have been subject to discipline based on the findings in the report. In fact, since the release of the report, personnel actions have been taken against those named in the report. Some have been terminated. Some are no longer with the district. And others who have gone through an investigation process have been cleared and have returned to a position within MCPS. People have been and are being held accountable. It may be helpful for our community to understand what it is that we mean when we talk about ensuring employees have due process rights. Employees have a right to what is called a Loudermill hearing. This is part of the due process requirement that must be provided to public employees prior to terminating or disciplining an employee. The purpose of a Loudermill hearing is to give the employee an opportunity to present their side of the story before the employer decides on discipline action. There are process steps that are involved and timelines that are required. All of this takes time, but it is intended to allow the employee the opportunity to present their story. We know the time process it requires can be frustrating. We also have heard your request for a better understanding of Jackson-Lewis's findings, and we have taken another look at the report and have released an easier to read, less redacted report. This is now on the Board of Education website. These were systemic failures. Moreover, the board, which is meant to act as the public's voice in the school system and exists to provide oversight to the school system, was not informed in a timely manner and therefore could not provide that much needed oversight. But that does not let the board off the hook. We need and must do better. We need to act on the recommendations of the OIG, including enacting strong and comprehensive policies to guide the work of the system. We are increasing our capacity for oversight for a system this large, both for HR and DCI and for the Board of Education. We need to insist on more transparency to us and in turn to you. We are deeply sorry for the pain that this has caused so many employees and the harm that it has done to our district. It has not always listened to its employees. It has not always properly investigated complaints, and it has not created a process that ensures its employees will feel safe to speak up. We understand that something has been broken in MCPS, and the board will work with MCPS leadership to ensure that what is broken will be fixed. It's time to move towards correcting these actions so that we can move past them. It's time for the school system to heal and to return its focus to delivering quality education to all of our students. Thank you.
Thank you, President Silvestri. Now we'll move on to MCPS leadership. I believe we have Interim Superintendent Dr. Felder, Chief Operating Officer Brian Hull, the Chief of the Office of Human Resources and Development, April Key, and the Acting Director of the Department of Compliance and Investigations, Ms. Stacy Ormsby. Nope, just, okay.
Start with me.
Okay, I'll start with you.
Council President, Council Vice President, Council members, good afternoon. First, let me say that I am very grateful to be here today and for the opportunity to work with all of you. As you all know, MCPS has faced many significant challenges over the past year. And I am looking forward to leading the work to put MCPS on a new and different footing in the coming months. Bottom line, and rest assured, we will implement all of the recommendations of the Inspector General. In the coming months, I will be working with my team and the Board of Education to put processes, practices, and tighter policies in place to ensure that this thing never, ever happens again. I will be connecting with staff regularly to review their work and ensure that we, including myself, are held accountable for delivering the recommendations in the IG's report. Indeed, we have much work to do. But it's abundantly clear to me, and this is my third day, it is abundantly clear to me that MCPS needs stability more than anything right now. My goal is to ensure we are able to work together to move past these obstacles and work together to reset our focus on what it needs to focus on, and that is teaching and learning for our 160,000 children who are counting on us every day. I am honored and humbled to be in this role, and I look forward to collaborating closely going forward. I would like to invite staff at this time to come to the table to give a summary of the work that has been done to date in response to the IG's recommendations. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Brian Hull, Chief Operating Officer, April Key, Chief Human Resources and Development Officer, and Stacy Ormsby, Acting Director of the Department of Compliance and Investigations.
All right. Good afternoon, Chair Stewart, members of the County Council. As you know, my name is Brian Hull. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Montgomery County Public Schools. First, I want to say thank you and that we are grateful for the Office of the Inspector General's report and her findings. We have already put several stopgap measures in place and are diligently working to complete the recommendations in full within the timeline set out by the Inspector General. We have a brief summary of the steps we have taken so far, and will then be happy to take any questions from the Council.
Good afternoon. I would like to introduce myself. I'm April Key, Chief of the Office of Human Resources and Development. I joined MCPS in June of 2023. This afternoon, I will provide you with a summary of the actions that MCPS has taken to date to address the recommendations from the OIG's report. In the interest of time, this will be brief. There is a full outline on the one-pager in front of you. Actions to date for recommendation number 1. Mid-October 2023, MCPS hired an acting director with extensive legal and investigative experience to oversee and implement changes to the process of receiving, evaluating, tracking, and handling employee complaints. Within the first 30 days of assignment, the acting director implemented procedures for receiving and acknowledging receipt of complaints, developed a protocol for processing anonymous complaints, and developed a process to ensure anonymous complaints are not missed. Actions to date for recommendation number 2. MCPS has established a process for analyzing, and appropriately assigning investigations. Provided guidance to district leadership regarding the implementation of progressive discipline policy as outlined in the Employee Code of Conduct. Developed a matrix to use when analyzing the impact of misconduct to ensure fair and equitable treatment. Actions to date for recommendation number 3. MCPS has developed and implemented a standardized triage process to ensure complaints are documented. Developed electronic intake forms to ensure electronic documentation. Developed a triple layer of documentation to avoid errors, and created a standardized communication to acknowledge receipt of a complaint. Actions to date for recommendation number 4. Establish regular weekly DCI departmental review of assigned investigations and progress monitoring. Establish proactive communication processes between the COO, Chief of OHRD, and the Acting Director to discuss investigations and dispositions. Establish weekly updates to the Cabinet and Leadership Team. Establish regular resource updates and guidance on navigating the complaint process provided for OSSWB core leadership team and PLC groups. Actions to date for recommendation number 5. Evaluated previous findings relating to DCI and established interim stopgap measures in accordance with known best practices and general investigative strategies. Obviously, these are stopgap measures while we take a deeper dive into implementing the recommendations from the OIG. Our next steps are to work with an external HR firm to seek technical guidance to advise on policies, regulations, procedures, and protocols. This RFP is in progress, and it will inform any restructuring of the department. Recommendations from the Investigations Community of Practice Work Group will be used to inform the work of the Policy Writing Group and investigation process. Thank you for your time today.
Did you have more to add? Oh, you put your...
Just as a brief introduction, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting us here today. My name is Stacey Terry Ormsby, and I'm the Acting Director for the Department of Compliance and Investigations.
Thank you, Ms. Ormsby. So at this time, if President Silvestri would like to come back up to the table, and Ms. Lamarzi, we will begin opening remarks and questions from council members. We'll start with the committees, and then if other council members who are here with us today would like to also speak or ask questions, please just let me know. A couple of other housekeeping things I want to note. We did send, the council did send over questions prior to the meeting today that we received some written responses to. Those will be posted with the other documents for this meeting. In addition, as was mentioned, that we had just received right prior to this meeting a less redacted Jackson Lewis report. I do want to note that every single council person has requested this report for months now. And we are glad that we have it today, but wish it could have been done earlier. So I want to thank you for the report today and the update on the work. But I will say, I feel like we're talking about Band-Aids when a lot more needs to be done. In addition to the processes and policies that need to be put in place, which are basic and fundamental, the task ahead is also to build trust, the cornerstone of which is transparency and demonstrated accountability, and to change a culture that allowed this to happen. The conclusion of the Jackson Lewis report stated, simply put, Employee 25 was promoted while the investigation was pending because decision makers did not exercise enough diligence to ascertain important details about the investigation. That failure is not as troubling as the failure of these key MCPS leaders to correct the mistake once those details were known after the promotion and to promptly notify the board about these issues. Now, I'm not asking about specific individuals, but I want to ask a question that was sent to you prior to today. And I get a very simple yes/no answer. On page 5 of the Jackson-Lewis report, it says MCPS leaders knew about the investigation prior to promotion. There are 5 employees. Employees 21, 14, 5, 13, and 22 did not inquire about the specific nature of the allegations. All this information was available to them prior to the promotion. My question is, are those 5 individuals still employed by MCPS?
Chair Stewart, they have either been terminated, they have gone through a disciplinary process and are still in that process, they have left the system, or they have gone through a disciplinary process and been reinstated to a position with an MCPS.
Can you tell me the breakdown of that numbers? How many are still with the system? There's only 5 of them.
I can share. I mean, that includes who was people that are still in the process.
So how many people are still in the process?
Of the 5 that you are referencing,
Mm-hmm.
let me see. Let's say 2.
And do we have a timeline for when they will be done with the process?
Oh,
A timeline? Do you know
Yep.
approximately how much more time as they go through the process?
yeah, I'm not sure how much time remains in that process.
So if 2 are still with, that leaves the 3 others. How many of the 3 are no longer in the school system?
Some have been terminated, and some have left the system for different reasons.
Can you tell me of the 3? Are any remaining, of those 3, are any remaining in the school system now?
There's the people that are still in the process, and
process.
have finished the process are still in the system now.
So I'm just going to say this again, because I only have 2 more minutes. 2 people are still going through the process. We have 3 others named in the report. Are those 3, how many of those 3 are still working for MCPS?
If I'm doing my calculations correctly, none. Either
Okay.
they've been terminated or they have left the system for various reasons.
Okay, thank you. In my minute and a half left, that took a little longer than I thought. I would like to look at page 9 of the report. Yeah, the Jackson-Lewis report, page 9. On March 25th, it says DCI does not formally investigate the complaint, but the issue was addressed to employee 22. This is a complaint that came via Lighthouse against employee 25. So it says it did not formally investigate the complaint, but was addressed by employee 22. What does that mean? It was addressed by employee 22? Do we know?
Which one are you referring to?
Page 9 on the March 25th. And I'm running out of time, and I have a feeling we're going to come back again.
And
So
everyone has this.
we'll come back to that one.
DCI does not formally investigate the complaint, but the issue is addressed by employee 22.
Yeah, and I have questions about, do we know what addressed by employee 22 actually entailed?
Yeah, I apologize, Chair Stewart. I think a lot of people came here with more of the recommendations to the county IG, but
We
let
can
me
follow
look
up
into
on
that.
that.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to turn it over now to Chair Jawando, and as a reminder for my colleagues that everyone, including myself as chair, gets 5 minutes to ask your question and get a response. And I guess we have a buzzer.
There you go.
Subtle one.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be, just like my co-chair, I'm going to be under time as well. I'd ask that you be very precise and concise with your answers. Ms. Lamarzi, you sampled 817 electronic files, sampled 10%. Turn your mic on. Yes?
Yes, sir. We sampled 10% of the 817
Right, so that's
files.
about 81-ish.
81, correct.
27% didn't have a disposition
They did not have documentation of a final disposition
which
in the
means
file.
whether something happened, whether there was, yeah.
A final report
Right.
or a copy of discipline or something like that.
How many of those that you sampled, the 81, were current employees? Do you
I
know?
don't know, I'm sorry.
You know that that's a knowable number.
Um,
You could find out.
I don't know that that was something
We looked at.
We were
Got it.
focused on. We really were addressing what that file looked like.
Got it. I ask because, and I'm going to turn to Ms. Silvestri in the system. I'm concerned because of the multiple layers of failures in reporting that there are complaints that have just not been investigated, and that we have people to this day who are being re-traumatized and dealing with this. And so the question to Ms. Silvestri and the board and MCPS leadership, whoever is best to answer it, the Jackson Lewis report revealed that the OIG and the OIG report that a director ordered the subordinate to change the investigative results of the Beidelman allegation. Has MCPS or the board conducted an audit of any past investigations to determine if there are any other problematic actions or outcomes for other complainants? To my point, my question, there are obviously people who have made complaints that were not investigated or that are still within the system. You want to say something?
Just if I can clarify
Yeah.
for 1 second, Mr. Jawando, the 817 are the electronic files that DCI has.
Right. Not all were complaints.
Not all are complaints of
Sure.
investigation. Some are
Sure.
CPS matters, for
Got it.
example, right, which has a whole different process.
But some are complaints.
Some are
Right.
complaints, and of the sample we did, the 10% we pulled, 27 of those 81 we could identify as being an investigation.
Got it.
So it's, I don't want to mislead, it's not 800 necessarily
Understood.
investigations.
But there is a population of complaints that may or may not have been investigated. So, Ms. Silvestri, is that part of the plan to go back and see what happened and to make sure that current folks in the system, even if they're not in the system, the people who were complained about, that those are investigated?
Yeah, I will turn to our HR director to see what plans she has for that, and I'm sure she would.
Is it the view of the board that that should happen?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Yes, and I know that our claims for reporting has gone dramatically increased over the last last year. So I think people are coming forward retroactively, but like you said, there needs to be a
Got it.
kind of a call for people that have felt that their investigations were not properly handled.
Not felt,
to
they
take review.
they weren't in some cases, as we know from the report. And I don't really need an answer unless you're going to tell me you've already started it.
We have not.
Okay, but it's going to happen. The next question to Ms. Ormsby or Ms. Key probably. In a January 22nd letter to the council, former Superintendent McKnight said the school system was implementing Go Guardian for their new complaint tracking software, and it would be implemented by the end of January. MoCo 360 reported yesterday that the school is contracting with Campus Kaizen, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, as its case management software. Can you confirm what tools being used to track complaints and maintain files, which was a core complaint or finding in the OIG report?
Good afternoon. DCI currently utilizes the FileMaker 18 platform. It's a case management compliance-oriented platform that houses each complaint and background information and resolution of matters.
So is Go Guardian happening?
Yes, it is. The kickoff call has already occurred, and there will be essentially 4 stages of implementation. It's set to take between 4 to 8 weeks to get to data transfer and integration.
Okay, I appreciate that. And in my last 30 seconds, I'll just say I think we have to look back to look forward. And I'll start where I finished, or finish where I started. The 25,000 employees, my kids' teachers, the paraeducators, all the great people who make up our system, in order to build confidence in the system for them and for the public, we have to make sure we go back and forward at the same time. And I know that's hard, but we got to do it because that's the only way we're going to get to the bottom of this. Thank you, Ms.
Thank you. Thank you,
Madam
Chair Jawando. I'll turn it now to Council President Friedson.
Thank you to both chairs. Speaking of looking back and ensuring that we go back in order to be able to move forward, I did just want to express my disappointment for why we're here, why we're discussing this, why we're not discussing how to ensure our children are safe, supported, and successful, but how our school system, our most indispensable public resource, failed to protect its employees or provide a safe learning environment and working environment for employees and students. It pains me that more than 6 months after the initial news broke publicly and several years after it was clear that leading officials in MCPS knew about allegations of harassment and workplace misconduct internally, this council and the public still don't really know who, what, when, and why. Hopefully today begins that process. Hopefully the more redacted report that we've been calling for, that we just received a little over an hour ago, will help us to move that forward. But we have to know the information of what happened to understand whether or not they're being addressed, whether or not we know the severity of the issues so that we can understand whether or not they're being adequately resolved. I'll note that that release of information was only done after relentless pressure from this council and from the public. And it was done at the 11th hour before this committee meeting, with really not enough time to utilize it to prepare for our line of questioning in a meaningful way. And I think it begs the question of the commitment of transparency and accountability that we really need to see from the Board of Education and from MCPS. What we have seen with this report and the sharing of information related to the report is not adequate. And I just want to note that. And I hope that as part of the movement towards implementing the changes with the Inspector General, moving forward with identifying and investigating anonymous complaints, which I talked extensively about in the September hearing, where we're seeing some progress on that, we need to see a deeper cultural commitment to accountability and transparency. Today's release demonstrates that there was discretion on what could be shared, that there was leeway here within the confines of the law, and that the law should be used to protect the public interest, not to undermine it, and the transparency and accountability of that public interest should be at the forefront. So I appreciate the board's apology. I appreciate the reiteration of that policy apology here today, and the new policies and procedures that were shared. The less redacted report is a step forward that many educators, families, and county taxpayers have been calling for, and I think deserve. But we still have questions, and the public still has questions. So in that vein, first question for Ms. Silvestri. Could you share with us specifically who was involved in determining exactly what was redacted in the Jackson-Lewis report that was made public originally and updated, and the updated version released this afternoon? Whose decision was that? And whose advice was the board receiving in order to make that decision?
Jackson-Lewis took a first stab at a redaction, and then our attorneys, according to employment law, felt that it needed further redactions, and that's what we put out.
Are there any other reports from Jackson-Lewis or any other outside firm other than the redacted one that has been released today that has been commissioned by the Board of Education or that has investigated MCPS?
Can you repeat the question?
Any other outside firms that have been obtained, or has Jackson-Lewis been commissioned to do any other investigations related to the Board of Education or MCPS?
No, they were commissioned to do that first investigation on the promotion process, and then the IG took over with the sexual harassment investigation.
Thank you. To Ms. Lamarzi, was there any information you requested from MCPS employees or from the Board of Education that you were unable to obtain in the process of your investigation?
No, only the information that we previously disclosed about non-cooperation.
From the second report?
In the second report.
In the second
correct.
report. Okay, thank you. I'll close on this. The Jackson Lewis report suggests that members of the Board of Education were interviewed. Were members of the Board of Education subject of any aspects of the Jackson Lewis report?
I'm not a lawyer. Subject means,
Like involved in any of the actions related to the issues?
no.
Okay. Thank you. With that, I'll yield back.
Thank you. I'll have Councilmember Katz next.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. And thank you, Ms. Lamarzi, for for all of your hard work on this topic. It seems to get lost in all the people who do the work. And your department and your thoughts and your suggestions, obviously, are something that we have to be always mindful of. And to Dr. Felder, welcome. As we met the other day, I said you've decided to come into a hornet's nest, and that's exactly what you've done. And thank you for be willing to do that. And I'm sorry that we've had to have this discussion today. It's been mentioned a couple times. I know I'm a product of Montgomery County Public Schools as well. A few weeks before Councilmember Jawando got there, and I know our elected Board of Education is extremely sorry that this has happened as well. We've heard it time and time again. This is perhaps one of the saddest moments in the history of Montgomery County Public Schools. And hopefully this will be the saddest. We're going to correct this. We're going to work together as a community to correct this. But part of healing, just like any operation, means you're going to have to go through some pain to get there. And that's what we're going to have to do. I want to publicly say, and she's been mentioned, but I want to publicly say that our friend Dr. McKnight, who is a dedicated educator and administrator, and that she, and I know, is very sorry that any of this happened as well. I haven't spoken to her recently, but I've known her since she was the principal of Ridgeview Middle School, and she certainly always had the children and the students in mind. And I know that this group, that this organization, that the Montgomery County Public Schools needs to work with everyone, and I underline the principals, the other administrators, their concerned parents and students, as well as their union partners, to get this done properly and to do it as quickly as we can. I've said that when Dr. McKnight got here, she bought a fixer-upper, but if you buy a fixer-upper, you need to fix it. We need to make sure, and it wasn't just she that did it, but we need to make sure that all of you have the resources in order to correct this. No one should ever feel that they're unsafe or uncomfortable or harassed in any of our schools, and that's for every person, whether they're on the educator side or the student side. And of course, in many cases, the first step is admitting a problem, and we've certainly done that time and time again today. I'm not here to fix the blame. You all need to figure that out, but we are here to fix the problem, and that's what we're all here for. I do have a question, though, I have 2 minutes. I could sing. I do have a question, though. To Dr. Hall, and I don't know whether you can answer this. If you can't, were you directly involved in any of this as well? It's my understanding that they reported to you that if there was a complaint that it came to you. If that's wrong, please correct me.
Good afternoon again. So I do oversee human resources, and we do review the people under investigation on a regular basis. I first became aware of this particular case with Mr. Beidelman on July 19th, and I was made aware by then Deputy Superintendent of the district at that time. So before that, I had no knowledge of this and was not made aware of any investigation ongoing.
And I thank you, because I think we need to have a public discussion on what did and didn't happen and why. And I believe that goes a long way. I also believe that what we need to do is to make certain that there is no question on the resources that you need. because for us to say we're going to fix this and not give you the resources is just a cruel joke. We cannot do that. And in my 29 seconds left, I did want to mention that of all the discussions that we have, I believe that we need to time and time again go back into the schools, and I keep talking about our union partners, and it's not only, it's every person involved, that we need to go back to talk to the people who are actually doing the work, to hear directly from them what did and didn't work and how we can correct it. And with that, I yield back. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Katz. I'll now turn to the members of the Education and Culture Committee and start with Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you. I'm just going to jump right in. So I was struck in the articles that have been printed and in some of the reports that numerous employees at all levels stated that they did not come forward before or had come forward before, but feared retaliation or retribution in some form or fashion. And when you read the less redacted version, which I've had a chance to read while we were here in the dais, you can understand why. There were documented cases of potential retaliation against people that came forward. And that's in one isolated, terrible episode. And so a reasonable person can infer that if that was the case in this episode, then perhaps the concern over retaliation and retribution is not only not unfounded, but actually exists. And so that's Management 101 in building trust with your staff and employees in any work setting, but particularly in one such as this, when we all have the collective responsibility to take care of our most precious commodity, which is our children and youth. And so my question is, with that as context, I know the practice had been to not investigate anonymous complaints as they came in, but in light of this report and what is the current environment and previous environment, are we revisiting that policy?
Yes, within my first 30 days as acting director, I created an anonymous complaint procedure that was then introduced to the DCI staff and has been in implementation since mid-October.
Good. So, Ms. Lamarzi, this is a systemic question for you and in your professional capacity and experience and expertise. There are, I believe, 5 full-time employees within DCI that were listed within the Jackson report as listed. I believe that's accurate. I could have that off by 1 or 2 people. But when you consider the amount of employees and all that they are responsible for, in your professional opinion, and you can come back to me with this response, is that enough? Or should we consider enhancing that office? It's already been restructured on its own. I have to assume, in part, because of the complaints that had been received before. But could you talk a little bit about, from your experience, and we've recently, as our chair noted, updated your office budget, but should we be doing the same for DCI?
Mr. Albornoz, I think that there needs to be an actual assessment of the mission and roles of DCI to determine what's the appropriate staffing level. I highlighted earlier, there's a disparate portfolio there right now, and that may not all belong there, and it may belong there, but need folks who have different training, backgrounds, expertise, and so the number may not be the issue. It really could be just having the right people. One of the reports that's highlighted in Appendix A, the 4 previous reports, there was a staffing analysis. So MCPS and the board has something to start with, to start to determine what would be an appropriate size, but it is probably also, again, a discussion of what is going to be DCI's role and function and what other offices are doing as well there.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Ms. Silvestre, is that part of what the human resources consultant that you all have brought on is going to recommend?
Yes, I just want to emphasize, yes, the answer is yes, but I want to emphasize the process. So we have put in stopgap measures to address some of the things that were highlighted in the Jackson Lewis report and the IG's recommendations, but those are just for now. while we get this external firm to help us provide technical assistance, our communities of practice, which are local experts, all coming together to do a more comprehensive analysis and comprehensive recommendations. As the IG has said, this is not a software package here or 3 more staff there. This is a comprehensive overhaul, and so we hope to bring the external expertise, the recommendations from the IG and our communities of practice together to the policy staff that we can then do the systemic rebuild that needs to happen.
My next round of questions when I get back in the queue are going to be specifically to the board and the steps that the board is taking. Sadly, this reveals that you can't always take what the superintendent says at face value. And so what steps are you all going to take moving forward to ensure there are checks and balances that you have to be able to ask tougher questions and follow through?
Thank you, Councilmember Albornoz. Now I'll turn to Councilmember Mink.
Thank you. I'll jump right in as well. As has been noted, given the 2019 and 2022 reports, there's a lot of concern, not just with the council, but with the public, that this time is actually going to be different. Obviously, we know that this time there is outside oversight in the form of the Inspector General and the check-ins, but nevertheless, those concerns are going to linger until this gets resolved. Backing on the last line of questioning, what is the current staffing of DCI, and are they currently still responsible for all of the buckets of work that were mentioned in the reports, the background checks, drug testing, ADA, et cetera?
Currently, there are 12 staff members for 25,000 employees and 160,000 students. We have 4 experienced coordinators, 4 experienced investigators, 3 administrative secretaries, and 1 acting director to service this entire district.
Are those all full-time positions?
No, there are 3 temporary part-time. 1 is a coordinator, 2 are temporary investigators, and
So we
actually
have-
4, and 1 is a temporary administrator
So we have 2 full-time investigators right now.
for the entire district.
That's very concerning. Do they currently feel that they have enough time to do their due diligence on investigations that they are being tasked with right now? How is the differential between the lack of staffing and what's actually needed being compensated for at this moment?
I don't know if I can speak to the compensation aspect of it. They work very diligently. The cases are ever increasing, and the resources are needed.
Okay. I just want to make sure that obviously, some calls are going to have to be made given the workload. People are submitting substantial complaints right now, and they're going to be expecting follow-up, especially in the wake of all this. And what we don't want to do is an inadequate job on those investigations at this moment.
So I can speak to that. Part of the effort to corral the number of complaints involves utilizing a triage process. I created a triage process so each complaint can be not only recorded but analyzed for the facts that are alleged, our regulations and policies, the appropriate office to handle the response, and before we even get to the triage, every complaint is acknowledged having been received with DCI, and our office now has regular updates and check-ins with complainants.
I understand that there have been some trainings that have happened for them since the news broke. Could you talk a little bit about that, specifically noting that having to investigate anonymous complaints is a new and different type of work? What have the trainings been thus far for DCI?
With regards to the anonymous complaint process, that is merely an SOP that we've walked through, explained, and applied. When those anonymous complaints do arise, I make sure to lend my supervision to those matters. As far as training,
I'm sorry, so you said that's just an SOP. Can you say a little bit more about what it looks like to walk investigators through how they are to handle anonymous complaints versus non-anonymous complaints? That seems a little more complex to me. I'm not an investigator, but if you could address that a little bit more specifically.
I'd be happy to share the documents to their detail. I would hate to misspeak, but essentially every complaint is important. So even anonymous complaints are stored within the 3 layers, with our FileMaker, with our shared drive, with our Google Sheet. Witnesses that may be mentioned in the complaint, we conduct our allegation review.
And so
If
the
there-
training, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have limited time. So the trainings that they have received, how much time on trainings have they received since this news broke?
I should clarify that my entry into this role began on October 20th. So
So to your awareness then, since October
there has been
20th.
no official training on the way of
Okay.
anonymous complaints. I have launched a Lunch and Learn series to, again, have a stopgap training opportunity for
I would
the
assume those would be
office.
optional because
No.
it's during lunch.
Well, it's actually at 11, so if someone wants to take their lunch afterwards, they're more than welcome to do it. It was widely and appreciated and received, so it's not a violation of anyone's lunch hour.
Okay.
Thank you. We will turn to other council members who have joined this joint committee session. And I'll turn first to Councilmember Glass.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate everybody joining us today. Your presence here, and I know those who are following online, is a testament to how important this conversation is and how important the 160,000 students in MCPS are and the 25,000 educators. Because this conversation is about making sure that we have safe learning environments for everybody in our schools. That's why we are here. That's why this is important. And as this conversation has evolved over the last 6 months or so, I'm reminded of a quote from Winston Churchill, that this situation has been a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. And within the last 2 hours, in an attempt to shine some light onto the situation, the school board has sent a less redacted report, and I appreciate that. We've been calling for that. I've been calling for that. Most importantly, our parents, teachers, and taxpayers have been calling for that. Ms. Silvestre, why was it only released today and an hour before this conversation?
Excellent question. A combination of factors. First and foremost, we've had a busy week. And so we had your request since Monday.
I've been calling for it long before.
Your most recent formal
So workload.
written request.
Just busy.
No, we had to make a decision about going back, having our attorneys looking back at the report that had been previously released. They have been helping us with a number of things this week,
Okay.
and so it just took time for them to be able to focus on it and be able to
Okay.
make a decision about whether to redact what we had already submitted or give you a different format, which we thought was more readable and more accessible, which is what we ended up doing. And that decision-making process took some time.
Appreciate that. Thank you. I took as much time as I could to read through it, and I know that members of the community are taking the time to read through that as well. In the reports that I've read, and even in the Inspector General report, it never said that this was a resource problem, that we've reached this place because of lack of funding. I don't think more resources would have resolved this. I think a different culture would have resolved it, and that's the only way that we can fix this. And I appreciate Councilmember Albornoz's question about DCI and the reports of retaliation that we've seen in the media, that I have received in emails and in other communications. And so, Ms. Ormsby, you mentioned in response to the question the tip line, and I think that's a good way to move forward. The concerns I've been getting is about the office itself, and that it's very hard to report to people that are unwilling to follow through, and especially when the retaliation might be coming within. What do you think about that?
If I could just jump in quickly.
After.
Okay.
Thank you.
That is troubling. As I stated earlier, every complaint deserves a voice and should be handled properly. I can speak to the efforts that have been in place since October 20th. And since
You already addressed that. You talked about the tip line. I'm asking about the culture in the office.
I think the culture in the office and of the compliance and investigations is a good one. It's a very hardworking staff, and I have to take a moment to recognize the work that they've put in through this ordeal and even prior to now, because as has been acknowledged by many people today, this is a systemic and a long-standing issue. It precedes the tenure of most of the people at this table, but this is an opportunity to move forward.
Thank you. And again, I am the recipient of these concerns, and using this position from this dais to ask you only what I've been hearing. In the few seconds I have remaining, Ms. Lamarzi, in your report you referred to, quote, evasive answers from MCPS in regards of some of the investigations you've been doing. What do we have to do to require responses that you yourself and your team deem adequate?
It was in the second report specifically that we referred to that. We've made a recommendation to the board to institute a policy that is akin to what the county has, which makes it, under the personnel regs here, a requirement to respond truthfully and cooperate. Obviously, under county law, I can subpoena people, I can put them under oath, and use all of those tools. There comes a point in a discussion sometimes, though, where no matter what you say to that subject, they just are not going to go there. And we have to work through that, and we report it, and that's what we did in this case. And hopefully MCPS is going to put out their expectation that everyone cooperate. I look forward to speaking with the interim superintendent. It was something that Dr. McKnight and I had already spoken about. And also the policy that Ms. Silvestri has already indicated that the board is open to.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Lukey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Lamarzi, quick question. Were you provided with an unredacted copy of the Jackson-Lewis report when you commenced your investigations?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We've had a couple of discussions here about complaint forms, whether they're anonymous or not anonymous, and the format. And I note that Ms. Silvestri, in your response to Councilmember Glass just now, you said, well, written request versus formal request. You used all three of those phrases when he was inquiring about having asked about the Jackson-Lewis report. And my concern is that that's the heart of a lot of this problem. And right after the Washington Post story broke, a senior member of MCPS leadership was sent to have a Zoom meeting with me because the school affected was in fact my children's school and in my district. And that individual told me then to use and tell constituents with concerns to use Lighthouse and the Safe Schools Maryland tip line, which were both anonymous reporting tools that we have learned throughout have not been treated in the same way. And, you know, if someone's telling you the house is on fire, are you going to ask them to fill out a form to say so? Or are we going to do something about the fire? And my question is, what has actually changed? What is actually being done? Not by software, not by filling out a new form. What is the actual doing that has changed as a result of the facts that have come to light through this investigation?
Well, as you have heard today, we have this administration has put up an action plan to stop the bleeding, to be able to handle those anonymous complaints, to properly address the Lighthouse complaints that come. Before they would go only to the DCI director, now they go to 2 additional people as a check and balance. So the emails have been changed. So a number of issues have been started, but as the IG said, that's just the start.
Right.
This is going to be a longer process to really overhaul and have meaningful change as we all want.
Right. And you know, to be fair, a lot of the issues that are highlighted aren't necessarily resource issues, they're people issues, right? And what's the plan moving forward to fixing that? Because that's not just a drain on your staff who feel like they're not heard, teachers, support staff, parents, students, but it's poor risk management. So what are you doing other than hiring the HR consultant moving forward to help more proactively manage the district's risk and take a more proactive stance on positive school climate and culture for staff and teachers as well?
Well, for school climate and culture, we have, as you know, we do our yearly survey to staff, and the Education and Culture Committee has had updates on that. In about a week, we're starting this year's climate and culture, and we hope that that will be a much better survey than this past year was, because we want more participation. We want to hear from our teachers, and we are working with our associations to make meaningful change as a result of the survey results. So that's just climate and culture.
Right. My question or my point is less about the survey and more about what is done in response to the survey. And so for me, that's what, I want you all to carry forward today, is that what I care about, what the parents care about, what the teachers care about is what is done with it. Mm-hmm. Not that you asked about it, but what is done with it. 9 of my children's teachers left Farquhar. 9 of them. And can you tell me sitting here today that those teachers, whether they've moved on to other positions within the school system, or for those who are remaining or joined the Farquhar staff, and the other staff members and the students, are safe from retaliatory conduct and are safe from being subjected to any further abuse?
That is our intent, Councilmember. And we are doing everything in our power to ensure that there is no retaliation in the school system. But again, it's not flipping a switch. So we're working one system at a time to cover our bases to make sure that not in a year from now, but today, on Monday, there will be new systems in place. Even they're not perfect yet, we have a long way to go, but that is our intent of this leadership team and our partners to make sure that that is the case.
Thank you all. You'll get back in the queue.
Thank you. Next we have Councilmember Balcom.
Thank you. It's tough going towards the end because a lot of questions have been asked, but the answers have opened up a lot more questions. So I'm going to try to be concise. Ms. Silvestri, in your statement on Tuesday to the Board of Education, at the board meeting, you stated that key members of MCPS leadership kept information from the board. Are those members still employed in MCPS?
I don't know. They are not.
Okay, I think that's the crux of this. And I understand that in the new action plan, the action plan states that no MCPS employee under investigation will be eligible for a promotion. I was surprised to see that statement, that wasn't established already. My question is, who will be responsible to make sure that that new policy is adhered to?
Ms. Key, can you explain how that would be? It seems like a no-brainer, but unless you check it off the list, it could get through. So
well, which it did in a monumental way.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. So in our department, when hiring administrative and supervisory staff, we have implemented a number of checkpoints. One being a complete look through the employee file, a check-in with DCI.
Just concise.
A check-in with DCI, and then we have a whole social media plan that we do on every single applicant.
So are you the only person then would determine that the individual is not under investigation?
The team. I have a team, and
Okay.
we do. We look at each one.
And then how would the chief administrative officer know, or the superintendent know, or the board know that this person indeed is not under investigation?
I sign an attestation, which also is signed by the COO and the deputy superintendent.
And that's
Okay.
presented to the board.
And that's a new process.
It is a new process.
Okay, thank you. And then I just want to just briefly talk about the funding issue. I think it's difficult to assess whether additional funding is necessary because the DCI department has been completely ineffective up until I don't know at what point it's become effective. So I don't think we know whether the resources that were already allocated to this function was effective. So I think that that's important to look at. And I'm really reluctant to look at additional funding for this very, very important topic or issue if the people who were in place prior to allow this to happen are still there. And I appreciate, Ms. Ormsby, your comment that the people are working hard and very diligently working. But if they're the same people who were in place and employed to allow not only complaints to go unanswered or not follow through or some of the responses to in this latest report of the prior director, I just don't have any faith that if the existing employees are in place without formal training, or maybe they're just not equipped to do the job, and so any comment on additional resources to this and how those would be used.
So the leadership has been replaced. Obviously, we have an acting director. As she has stated, she has many temporary part-time investigators, experienced investigators, but they are new. And the office was very small to begin with, and so.
So of the 12 staff, how many are new to the DCI?
There's one permanent new coordinator and 3 temporary part-time employees.
Okay,
that conduct investigations.
Thank you. I'm sorry, my time's up. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Sales?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just going to get right into it because time's of the essence. Significant question that persists is why this incident was handled differently compared to previous grievances. This past September, MCPS was ordered to pay what was reported to be the largest settlement of its kind in the state. Nearly $10 million to the 4 victims of the 2017-2018 football hazing sexual assaults case at Damascus High School. Is the coach and principal still employed by MCPS that was there during that time frame?
Is anyone able to answer that?
Yes, they are.
I do not recall any instances where an OIG report or public hearing was necessitated in response to such grievances. At a time when we're losing educators, support staff, and leadership at an unprecedented level, and as you're seeking to recruit and retain a permanent superintendent, can you please clarify how decisions are made regarding disciplinary actions against a superintendent in response to internal complaints and the factors considered when seeking a resolution to address these complaints? And I don't know who wants to take that answer.
So the Board of Education, as you know, our only employee is the superintendent. And we have annual performance evaluations. We set up a agreed upon framework on how he or she is going to be evaluated. We have quarterly conversations, so we don't wait till the end of the year to provide feedback on that agreed upon framework.
And so what actions were taken against the last superintendent when this incident occurred? What disciplinary actions occurred?
I was not on the board when this incident happened. However, I did join the board maybe a month or two afterwards, so I'm trying to remember, but in accordance to our practices, feedback would have been given to the superintendent at a quarterly conversation, based on what quarterly conversation was happening immediately after the incident.
But at any time, was the superintendent asked to step down or leave his post during this incident?
No.
Okay. Furthermore, who determined the specific time frame to focus on for the investigation? I see that 2020 to 2023 was the area of focus for these randomly selected files. And I'm just trying to figure out how many outstanding complaints remain unresolved outside of this time frame.
The scope of the review, we decided we try to have a broad enough range of information that we can get a good sense of what the entire process may look like. We are also limited, as we stated in the report, by the email retention policy, the state of the files. 821, I think I keep forgetting, is a lot. So, we have limited resources too. We can't look at everything over every year. We have to stick to a very set scope of time that would give us a sense of what was going on and encompassed most of the known complaints about Dr. Beitelman, because we were doing both at the same time.
So it's our understanding that everyone was unaware of the complaints until the situation was escalated. And so a question that still remains, why was Dr. McKnight requested to resign if the report confirmed that this was a systemic issue that predated her appointment? Can anyone answer that question?
As you know, this has been a huge challenge and distraction for the school system. This is a mutually agreed upon separation. We are focused on moving on, fixing the problems, and focusing back on teaching and learning for our students and creating a safe working environment for our staff.
Throughout the new process, who will be privy to the details of the complaints until they are resolved, and is there an expected time frame for completion on any new or outstanding complaints?
Who will be privy to the complaints that are being filed?
Yes. Who has access to the complaints filed in this system, in MCPS?
The team in DCI has access. I have access. The CEO has access. The deputy superintendent has access, and certainly the superintendent.
What about the Board of Education?
Yes, they would have access to information that we could provide them. They are often called to be hearing officers or adjudicators, and so we don't give them too much information.
And what's the time frame for completion? Are they just...
Councilmember Sales, do you want to get back in the list?
Yes,
Your
I'll
5
get
minutes.
back into
Thank
the
you very
queue.
much. Thank you. Next is Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez.
Dr. Fellner, my name is Natalie Fanny Gonzalez. We haven't met, but welcome back, I should say, to MCPS. I just want to start by saying that this morning we had an amazing work session with the Economic Development Committee and the Education and Culture Committee, where we had MCPS attending and telling us about the amazing work that they are doing on the sports industry area. Honestly, we are the forefront, and those are the type of things that we need to keeping in mind about the amazing school system that we do have, okay? I was in Taiwan just last year with a county executive on an economic development mission, and I spoke to so many scientists from Asia, and the first thing that they would say when they heard that I was coming from Montgomery County was MCPS public schools. They would say that they came to that they went through the school system, then they went to college, worked at the life science industry, but it's all based on the foundation that we have done throughout the years, and I want to make sure that we don't lose that in this conversation. As many people know, I have a couple of children in the Montgomery County Public School system. I have so much love and respect for Ms. Benedetti, for Dr. Gertz, and so many other people who have taken care of my kids throughout the years. And I say that because I also feel responsible to ensure that I'm doing my job, to ensure that the staff and the teachers and the students are also taken care of. So when this news broke, I started getting phone calls from teachers. I still been getting phone calls from a recently employee of MCPS who came to me to make a complaint. And what I'm doing is I direct them to the Inspector General's office. That fear still there. That mistrust still there. Lots of things that we're all thinking of that haven't been answered here. And perhaps, I guess my question would be, what are you going to be doing, especially you that are coming in, to gain the trust from the staff and the teachers and the students who are seeing this? My kids are in elementary and middle school. They know everything, okay? They know everything. The students are talking about it, okay? So it's bad. So I want to hear from you. What's your plan on that area?
Thank you so much. Pleasure meeting you, and I appreciate your question. So to begin building, rebuilding, resetting on trust, it is extremely important to engage with staff, with our students, our families, members of the community, and hear from them. To gain a deep understanding of their perspective, what they're feeling, but also get their recommendations on how to move forward. We cannot be blanketly prescriptive. They have a voice, they've had an experience, and it's going to be extremely important to involve them and get their input on how to move forward.
Thank you for that. And I just want to also share to the school board. You guys are in a position of power. Okay, when I'm here on the county council or when I was on the planning board, when I got information from staff, I didn't just say yes and just simply took it. You had to question. This is about accountability and making sure that it's transparency. And that's what every single parent in this county and student is asking. It's not a money issue. It's a trust issue and understanding that you have a responsibility to ensure that the money that we're giving you, half of the budget we're giving you, is actually taken in a responsible way and making sure that we all know as parents, as teachers, as council members, as people who live in this county, understand how the money is spent and what are the results. That's what I'm asking you to do. And it's not a question, it's just a word of advice. Because at the end of the day, you're elected officials just like we are, but you have to you have to understand the power that you have and use it. And not just say yes to the staff and thinking that they're okay, they're doing their jobs. No. So.
Thank you for that, Councilmember. And I do want to say that we are building our capacity by adding more staff because we need help in order to do our jobs effectively.
And I'm gonna push back. You don't have a staff issue. What you have is what you have is an attitude. You gotta make sure that you understand your power and demand accountability and transparency. You don't need people to tell you that. You can do that yourself. You're an elected official. Anyway, I yield back.
Thank you, Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez. We're going to do one more round of questions and comments. Again, we will start with the joint committees who are here today, the Audit and then EC Committee, and then go to our colleagues who have joined us today. I appreciate my colleagues following and our guests following the 5 minutes because I'm sure folks have places to be this evening, children to pick up, and dinners to get cooked. So we'll go through one more round. So I will kick us off, and I want to follow up on my questioning before, and I think where Councilmember Balcom was going, and Dr. Hull, maybe you have a clearer understanding of this given your position, but I think what people need to hear regarding accountability is overall how many people have been found to be involved in culpable conduct or misconduct around this situation. Have those people been disciplined? How many ongoing investigations are there, and what's the timeline for bringing those investigations to a close?
To the best of my knowledge, there were 5 people that were identified as being involved in a manner that violated policy. Of those 5, 2 remain in active in the process. 3 are no longer with the school system.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. My next question goes back to what the Inspector General raised when she was talking about documenting of not just current relationships among staff members, but also previous relationships in her report today. And I want to thank Ms. Key and for the presentation the other day when you were talking about the HR procedures. I watched the recording of the Board of Ed meeting. I don't remember that coming up in the discussions. I know you covered a lot of ground and there's still more to do. But is that part of what you're looking at now and how to document that?
We are looking at consanguinity and how to best implement that recommendation without negatively impacting employee promotion. So yes.
Great. The other point I wanted to get to, it goes back to my comment I made earlier, which is, and I know the urgency of getting things done, but sometimes putting a Band-Aid on something when we don't need a Band-Aid and we need something more. And it struck me again when the Inspector General was talking about her report and what she saw, and whether or not we have to really think about the mission and the role of DCI, what is it? The department, thank you, right now to tackle these issues. And I know we spoke of an HR consultant being brought in, but again, there's the immediacy and then there's putting in place the structures and processes moving forward and really thinking about how organizationally MCPS is going to run. And so are those conversations happening?
Those are initial conversations that we're engaging in, but we are expecting to get technical assistance from the HR firm that we eventually contract with.
Great. And then my final question is, and I think all my colleagues have said this in one way or another, is we need to rebuild trust. There needs to be a culture change, and it needs to be communicated. It needs to be connected to our families, to our staff, to our educators, and everyone who works for the system. How are you all doing that?
I mean, I think that first of all, by developing an action plan, communicating that to the public. But until you begin to do what you say you're going to do, people are not going to believe you and they're not going to rebuild the trust. So we have laid out the first few steps that we need to take, but only time will tell. You know, our actions speak louder than our words, and so I think it's a matter of doing what we say we're going to do, and doing a better job of communicating that to our staff and to our families.
Okay. I think it also just, yes, Dr. Hull, yeah.
I was just going to go back to the statement I made. I'm looking down at my notes here, and I just want to make a correction. Of the 5 people, 2 are no longer with the system, 2 are in process, 1 has been disciplined and returned to work. I apologize for the misstatement.
I appreciate you fixing that in real time. And I think going back to the idea of doing things but also communicating, that is the most declarative statement we've had, even though you had to correct it, in months, in terms of accountability of what's being done. And so I think that is also really important for our community to hear that. So I thank you, and I'll turn it over now to Chair Jawando.
Thank you, Chair Stewart, and thank you and welcome again, Interim Superintendent. At the EC Committee hearing that we had on the Jackson Lewis report, President Silvestri, I asked about what role does the board have in reviewing investigations? And you said to me, I'm paraphrasing, that we have a role, we get things, but we don't see all of the information. Could you explain very briefly what your role is, the board's role is in reviewing disciplinary investigations?
So when an employee goes through their Loudermill hearing, which I described in my remarks, the hearing process yields a result. The superintendent makes a recommendation for termination, for discipline, demotion. That goes to the Board of Education for final approval or not. And so
that's an individual case.
Yes.
So, but as far as reviewing aggregate numbers of complaints,
Talking about sexual harassment
Yes.
report, for example?
Sexual harassment report, yes, that's what we talked about.
Yeah, as I shared at that hearing, the report as had been presented to us had very little information. So, for
Okay.
example,
Is that changing?
We have communicated to the Director of Human Resources the parameters that we want to see so that we can have in the future a better sense for when there are repeat offenders, when we're seeing multiple offenses at a particular school.
Got it.
So the board
Thank
can
you.
ask questions.
I appreciate that. That's way too late, right? I don't understand, to Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez's point, if you're in a review on sexual harassment, how someone would not ask, hey, are there repeat offenders on this list? How is it, those questions should be automatic. And if the process isn't in place, it shouldn't have taken this to get there. I'm glad we're doing it now, but that is like, so much of this stuff is 101. Like, it should have been happening for years. And it's just amazing to me that a system of this size, that we are this inadequately and just so behind. It's really scary. The July 2019 report that's in Appendix A of the IG report, you were elected in 2018, I know because we both were. And the July 19 report, investigation by a private law firm, who requested that report and who was it reported to? Did the board receive information on that report?
No, the board only became aware of that report when we requested it to inform our policy development process in November, December of this past year.
So a report was done in 2019, and you just learned about it a few months ago.
Yes.
Ms. Lamarzi?
Mr. Jawando, that report was provided to the former general counsel of MCPS and the associate superintendent of operations at the time.
Got it. The January 2022 MCPS OHRD report, which again outlined a lot of the things that you've outlined about failures in DCI. Did the board have that report?
January 2023?
It says 22 in my
22.
22, yeah.
Again, no, we did not have that until we asked for that information.
So you weren't aware of any of the DCI structural failures prior to summer of last year, is what you're saying, the board?
Yes. First, Jackson Lewis informed us, gave us a briefing of what they had found in terms of structural failures in DCI, and then when we uncovered these reports in November, December of 2023.
Okay. Well, there's obviously a structural failure within the board to be able to review these types of reports that have languished for years, and to not be able to ask these types of questions. And so, again, I think part of rebuilding the trust, and you have acknowledged that a lot today, and you apologize, I appreciate that, but taking an active role in this evaluation, this revision of structure, the staff qualifications, the positions within the central office, you all are going to have to be much more involved. Would you agree?
Yes.
And you're setting up systems and processes to do that.
Yes.
And to the interim superintendent, what's your view on how you interact and your team that you will be managing for this period of time will deliver that information and interact with the board to improve these processes?
So my role and the role of my team is to ensure that the board receives all of the information it needs so that they are aware, so that they can give feedback and make informed decisions. Honestly, some of this the board shouldn't have to ask for. We should be providing
Agreed.
to the board.
Yeah, it's definitely, and I've said this, like, there's a lot of blame to go around here, and that's my point. There's not one actor, one person, one office. This is something that was systemic. and it's going to take a while. We appreciate your candor today on it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'll turn it to Council President now.
Thank you. To that point, it's evident from the Inspector General report, from the Jackson Lewis reports, from the responses to today's questions that these issues are endemic, that they're pervasive, that they've spanned for many years, and they reflect a culture that has appeared to focus more on protecting the school system than protecting the people who work and go to school in the school system. And it is just really deeply troubling that it seems that for years there has been more concern about reputational harm than actual harm to actual people. The 25,000 people who work in schools, the 161,000 students who go to school every day. That has to change. And we all own that. To be very clear, everything rides on having a public school system that functions, that works well, that's providing a world-class education to all of our kids, everybody. That's not just true of the 1 in 4 families who send their kids to public schools in Montgomery County. That's true for everybody. Everything that we do here rides on us getting this right. And there is work to be done, and there is a lot of trust that needs to be rebuilt, and there is major cultural change that there is progress towards that perhaps, but we are not there. And I just want to be very clear, and I hope that all of us can be clear-eyed about that. And that's not for the Board of Education alone, that's not for the MCPS leadership alone, that's not for the county council, the county executive, or our state partners. That's everybody. We all own that. We all have to be part of that and committed to working together. I just want to note regarding the release of the unredacted Jackson Lewis report, my recent letter that was referenced was just the latest in months and months of repeated calls by every single person here, including virtually every single person here on this exact dais, starting in September before that report even came out. So to suggest that there wasn't enough time this week because a lot was going on is disingenuous and is deeply unfortunate. So I just want to note that. I don't need a response, but just know that if we are going to rebuild trust, the focus can't be on using reasons why things can't be released. It should be on focusing on why they can be released. You can get a lawyer to tell you whatever you want the lawyer to tell you based on a law that could provide a reason not to share information. The question is, what is the culture and the commitment to transparency, and whether or not there is an argument to be made that you can share information. That's what we want to change, and it shouldn't take us demanding something to get it. Just like you don't feel like the MCPS leadership should require you to demand a report as a Board of Education, we shouldn't have to demand things be released so that the public can understand what is going on in the school system in order to get things to happen. And it shouldn't take months for it to happen either. So a few questions. The action plan update that was released on January 22nd, it shares that the Board Policy Management Committee will develop new policy to guide the Board of Education's role in the appointment of key MCPS leaders and establish timelines and criteria for information to be included in the superintendent's recommendation for Board of Education appointments. A quick answer, when can we expect the policy to be finalized and shared with the public? Is that a Board of Education or a leadership question?
On the appointment process?
Yeah, what is the timeline when that will be shared with the public, those changes specifically?
Do you know when that is in the?
The community of practice around investigations is ongoing. We have, I believe, 4 more weeks. At that point, the committee will get the recommendations to the policy work group, and then we've just finished the one for promotions, and it took them less than a week to turn it around.
Okay, 4 weeks it'll be made public, and then a decision will be made by the committee at that point?
It will go to policy committee,
The policy
at
committee.
the end of
Okay.
March, early April.
The report found that the Title IX coordinator simply sent employee Title IX complaints to the Department of Compliance and Investigations, and it appears that nothing happened, that they were not actually investigated by that office at all. Can you explain how did that loophole happen? Is the system's Title IX funding jeopardized by the fact that there was really no Title IX follow-through that was actually happening? How is this being addressed specifically? Because I haven't heard that today, and I haven't heard that up to this point. And what is the role specifically of the Title IX coordinator moving forward? And have there been any changes to that?
Just quickly, the one change that has happened is that it's not only going to the DCI director now, but it's being sent to Mr. Hall and Ms. Key. So there's additional checks and balances. It's not only going to DCI now, but I'll let them answer the other questions about title.
I'm out of time, and it doesn't appear like you have a response, which is unfortunate.
We have a response.
If you could follow up specifically on the role of the Title IX coordinator, what changes have been made to the Title IX coordinator, and how those issues are being addressed. I haven't heard that shared publicly up to this point.
Ms. Key, did you quickly want to address that? You can.
Yes. The Title IX coordinator is not in OHRD. That person is in a different department, however, under the COO.
So, yeah, do you want to just?
So one of the changes that we're looking at, and of course, as has been said many times here today, before we implement any permanent changes, we do want to make sure that we're gathering all of the feedback. But one of the things that we are considering is, do those two offices need to be closer together and possibly under the purview of the same chief? And so that would be a potential change that would be made.
Thank you for that. Next, we'll go to Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much. I would have actually yielded some of my time for you, not a whole lot, but some of it. Ms. Lamarza, you said that you investigated, that no one on the board was a subject of the investigation, which we're appreciative of. But did you ask any questions of the board? I think there's been some confusion whether the Inspector General asked any questions of any of the board members.
In regards to which project,
To
Mr. Katz?
this process in general, to Dr. Bidelman, to everyone, to everything.
Our focus was on the process that MCPS follows for handling the complaints against employees for misconduct. So the board isn't part of that process, and so we weren't directly speaking to the board.
Okay. And thank you. And I'm confused about the Lighthouse hotline. You mentioned it in your report, but there's many different mechanisms to submit a complaint, anonymous and otherwise, I guess. And is the system contracted through the Board of Education? Is it through MCPS? How do you utilize it?
Lighthouse is an online system that is available. Not only did the director of DCI have access to that system, but the internal auditor, who is housed within the Board of Education, has access to that system. So they're notified when complaints come in on that system, and then can go in and triage. And again, it is set up to allow for anonymous complaints, but it does have some features where you can say, yes, you can contact me. Still don't tell you who I am, but through the system, you get like a PIN, and you can communicate that way. That was a source of probably some of the more detailed complaints that came in, because it has a form and it's retained. That information is retained on the system itself. So that's one very standardized mechanism, if you will, that is available. And Safe Schools is contracted through the state. And was set up, my understanding, it was set up really so really students, for the most part, I think can have a place, but employees as well, to make those complaints about safety issues.
Thank you. And to the point of when someone files a complaint and who knows it and who's going to be taking care of it, I believe for your own protection, for your own safety, you need redundancy to make certain that others are aware that you are working on it, or so that when someone is having this type of concern, we need to make certain that their concern is handled quickly and responsibly and efficiently. And I believe that we need more than a few sets of eyes to be on it. So just as a statement. And I guess in my minute and a half left here, I think having a better system is important. I really do. But just to fix up a system that didn't work might not be the best system that we should have. So the question becomes, if we were starting this system from scratch, if this, in Montgomery County Public Schools is not a new system, but if we were starting this system from scratch, what system would we have in place so that we have the best system that we could possibly have? Does anybody know whether who has the best system in America?
We're hoping that our HR technical assistance consultants can do that work for us to give us different models that we can look at for implementation here.
Any idea how fast we're going to know that answer?
That RFP is out yet?
The RFP is complete, just needs to be published.
It just needs to be, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the last
It
part.
goes through procurement.
Yes.
And then it can be published.
Mr. Katz, if I may also just highlight that the second report that's in Appendix A, which is from January of 2022, includes benchmarking. And that was a report that was requested by the former HR director. It is a detailed analysis. I always think cost, so I start at this is something that exists, isn't going to cost extra money, and is a great resource.
And I appreciate that, but there's some things that we can't afford not to do. And I think this is one of them. If we're going, I got 7 seconds, if we're going to make certain that we have a trust in our community, we need to make certain that our community realizes that we're doing the best that we can possibly do. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. I'll turn it to Councilmember Albornoz now.
Thank you so much. So I made this comment in our previous briefing on this issue a few months ago, and I'll reiterate it now. Our Board of Education is paid what amounts to a stipend. It is part-time, and most of you actually have full-time jobs in addition to your work on the board. And so the entire construct of checks and balances, I think, is something that needs to be evaluated systemically, because as we're hearing the challenges that DCI has had, I start to wonder, what about the Student Welfare and Compliance Unit, which is the corresponding unit that's supposed to be taking care of our kids, who's responsible for overseeing cases of bullying, harassment, intimidation, child abuse, hazing, and hate discrimination and racism. So if I'm a member of the board, on a parallel track, I should be looking at similar systems and constructs and holding hearings and having conversations about this. But I just worry that we're not built to be able to do that in a way that's effective enough. And it may not be just a staffing issue, which has been acknowledged. It's more than that. And so I think all of us collectively have a role to play there in advocating at the state level that these positions become full-time. Because just considering the operation as a whole, on Friday, Councilmember Jawando and I had the opportunity to visit, along with staff from other teams, the food distribution facility, which serves more meals than Disney World per day. It is a massive operation. And so it just begs for there to be more accountability moving forward in partnership with the administration and the school system, who I think is full of remarkably dedicated people who are working their tails off day and night. And this is all happening in the midst of one of the most challenging situations our kids have ever faced coming out of COVID. And literacy scores and math scores that are catastrophically low. Behavioral health challenges, and our kids are screaming for help. I'm preaching to the choir. But these are issues that we need to be focusing on, but we can't focus on them entirely until we get these administrative components right. And so I'll just end with this. This has been incredibly painful for everybody involved, especially those closest to it. I do appreciate your apology note, Ms. Silvestre. I think it was sincere and authentic, acknowledging that this has caused a lot of pain. And clearly, a lot of work is going to have to be done. I know my colleagues and I are committed to being strong partners and to addressing the systemic issues that preceded the current and former leadership. We've got to do better, and we will, and we're going to do it together. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Mink?
Thank you. I want to specifically acknowledge that if MCPS had taken action on the private law firm report that was done in 2019, or on the human resources review that was done in 2022, we may have prevented extremely painful experiences for many staff members and the school system as a whole that changed lives, changed careers. It is essential that we get it right this time. There needs to be meaningful systemic structural changes, I think not just within MCPS, but also regarding the relationship between MCPS and the Board of Education. Is that going to be part of the review, part of the recommendations supported by the outside firm that's going to be assisting with this process? The microphone. Yeah.
You're asking about whether the HR firm will look at the role of the board and the...
Right, the relationship between the Board of Education and the school system itself.
I don't know if that's part of the RFP, but that's an excellent recommendation.
Okay, I would highly, highly recommend that to some of the issues that my colleagues have raised as well. To that point, currently, and we've talked about capacity, and that goes to, and I think that Councilmember Albornoz raised a good point. You also share staff, right, between the Board of Education and MCPS. That's correct. Is that correct?
We have our own executive staff and administrative staff, about 8-9 people.
Are there staff members that are shared between the Board of Education and the school system as well?
Not necessarily. I mean, like, for example, the communications office is at our disposal, but the priority is the school system.
Do you share general counsel?
We have our own contracted firm.
Okay. This is a question for Ms. Key. So I understand that the community of practice is finalizing recommendations that are going to be coming out later this month. Obviously, you're also retaining outside support to help put it all together. But as a member of the investigation subcommittee, could you give us a bit of a preview, highlight some of the discussions that have been taking place about the specific deficiencies that are being addressed, that folks would like to see addressed, and some of the possible recommendations that we may see emerging from that subcommittee?
Certainly. One of the topics that has been important is the idea of reporting out and our systems and our inability to track behaviors or see trends. And so those deficiencies will be addressed with recommendations. There will also be recommendations around our comprehensive policy that needs to guide the work. Currently, the policy is not specific, and we are limited in our ability to really have guidelines that control the work. So the community of practice experts have given us information. We will expect a number of recommendations, and those will go to the policy writing work group.
Okay, thank you. As we're moving forward, I just want to highlight how important it is to make as much of all the elements of this process extremely clear and transparent to the public. So the recommendations coming out of the communities of practice, specifically, what are people asking for? What are the recommendations that are coming from the firm? What are the very specific changes in this this kind of stopgap flyer that we have, which I appreciate. But we don't have any specificity here, right? Developed a protocol for, implemented procedures for. What are those procedures? I realize that would have been a much longer packet, but I think that making that information available to the public is extremely, extremely important for all elements of this process moving forward. And in closing, I want to, appreciate and agree with some of the comments that we've heard from colleagues about the amount of work that we have to do, but the fact that everyone here is committed to doing it together. There are many, many years of systemic issues that need to be rooted out and changed, and there is a lot of pain that is still lingering here. So it's going to be essential for all of us to come together to be as transparent and accountable as possible and get this done ultimately for our staff and our kids, which is where our focus needs to remain. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'll turn to Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to continue the conversation and focus on the finances. Mr. Hall, and I think the question would be directed to you, how much was paid for the Jackson Lewis report, or to have them on retainer to produce the report?
I actually don't have that number in front of me today.
Does anybody before us have that number? Ms. Lamarzi.
I believe it's the 1 month.
Pardon
I
me?
should take it back. I have ideas of what it is, but I shouldn't give you an exact number at this point. I know it's over $100,000 in total has been spent.
Thank you. Well, according to recent reports, the school district has paid 548% more in legal fees this year than last. And according to reports I'd read, that the legal fees for the Jackson Lewis, I'll say retainer, if that's in fact what it was in excess or around $195,000. I look forward to receiving a response for you for that. But I think that goes to a broader question, one that I've been talking about, particularly last year when we went through a very difficult budget with MCPS and our educators and our taxpayers. And back then, and still to this day, I will continue calling for more transparency in the $3.2 billion budget that is MCPS. Because I'm curious, are lawsuits and settlements and investigation fees included in the budget that is currently before the board? Mr. Hall, you're the COO. Do you know that?
We include an estimate. Of course, that's all that we know, before the fiscal year begins, and then, obviously adjustments are made as necessary.
And I understand the budget that's now then goes to the board and the county executive and to us, but do you have a rounded number as to what lawsuits, settlements, and investigations are in the budget?
I don't have that with me, but I can follow up.
Okay. Right now, state law only requires school districts across the state to classify their budgets into 14 very broad categories. I think 14 is way too small for a $3.2 billion budget, and I'm glad that the Maryland Association of Counties agrees and is taking this up as state legislation, and I hope that everyone following this conversation contacts our state delegates and state senators and encourages them to apply transparency at the budgetary level as well. Because in order for the board and for us to do our fiscal oversight within a $3.2 billion budget, we need more than 14 broad categories to do that work. And talking about work, I appreciate the sentiments that some of my colleagues have echoed with regard to the Board of Ed. It is hard. There's a lot coming at you, and it is part-time work. You're paid $25,000 with a handful of staff. And at the hearing in September, I specifically asked about staff, and at the time, there were 3 that were said that were already hired and a handful more that were in the process. So now you're up to about 8 to 10 is what I'm told. Is that right? So that will help a little bit, but the time that you have to devote to this work, I think requires full-time status. Back in 2019, the Montgomery County Board of Education Compensation Commission, back in 2019, said the Board of Ed should be full-time and paid more than it is now, which is not even a living wage. I know all of us support living wage legislation for our hard-working employees, and I would say that our public servants on the Board of Ed deserve more than a living wage as well. And this document from 2019 actually says $60,000 would be adequate. We can have a public conversation about it, but we need you to succeed. We need you to have the time and the staff to do your due diligence on a $3.2 billion budget, and that is not even including everything else, like some of the issues we're talking about today. We need you to succeed, the taxpayers need you to succeed, and more importantly, our kids need you to succeed. So I look forward to having that conversation to help you help all of us. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'll turn it now to Councilmember Lukey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to ask a few questions about ongoing policies so I can understand them better. So, for example, there was a MoCo 360 article on January 12th, and it discussed in there the allegation that an employee who was on leave, their equipment was required to be turned back in. Is that something that is always required of every employee when they are on any leave of any kind?
That is not something that is always required. However, that employee worked in DCI and had not saved files to the server, so we needed the laptop so that we could continue with investigations while that employee was out.
And was that explained in email correspondence
Yes,
to the employee? So administrative leave. Administrative leave is something that's also come up a lot frequently as various employees have been placed on administrative leave. What is the purpose of placing an individual on administrative leave?
We place employees on administrative leave in the event that they're not safe, or they've created an environment that's not safe, or there's been impact to the community while we investigate if they've committed a crime or have alleged to have committed a crime, whether it be at the school district or outside of the school district.
Okay. And is that there's an HR policy, I'm assuming, that requires if an individual, like, let's say you're arrested on a Saturday night, you have to provide that information to your employer. If they fail to provide that, subsequently they could be disciplined or terminated for failure to notify the employer?
That is correct.
Okay. What are the costs to the school system of having employees on administrative leave for extended periods of time?
So it can depend. There can be paid leave, in which case the employee would retain their salary, or there can be unpaid leave, and that determination would be based on the merits of the particular case.
Okay, and that the merits are determined as an investigation is pending, meaning it could be based on the seriousness of an allegation?
Correct. As Ms. Key said, if student or staff safety is compromised or other serious matters, that would be grounds for administrative leave.
There's been a common ongoing, this is not a new thing, practice within MCPS Central Office of reassigning staff members to the HR department. Can somebody explain to me why people get reassigned to the HR department?
That is a practice that has been in place that we are changing. And it is not unique to MCPS. This is the third school system I've worked in, and that is often the case. However, as I've said before, I think human resources in an organization with 25,000 people across over 200 locations is one of the most important aspects of the work that we do, and we need to have professionals doing that work. So when I hired Ms. Key, I made sure that we brought in someone that had extensive background in human resources in a district about twice the size of MCPS, one of the largest in the country.
Right, okay, I appreciate that, but I guess my question is, there are people who get reassigned to the HR department and they're not there doing HR work, they're just on the books as being in the HR department, and I don't understand that, and I don't understand the point or the purpose of that, and I think a lot of people don't understand the point or the purpose of that, and that was used in this case, and it's been used with other employees of the central office who are now no longer with the school system. That has happened and transpired over the past 12 months. So I'm trying to get at why are folks who aren't HR employees assigned to HR, and what are they doing in there or not doing?
So
Yeah.
I myself have not reassigned anybody to human resources. I think it is often a place in school systems where people are put so they are doing HR work, first of all. The title might be special assignment, but they are doing HR work. But it ends up, I think, oftentimes being a place where people are put, as opposed to being put in finance or IT or someplace that has a more specific skill set. But as I said, we view human resources as a very specific skill set, and
Right.
that's why we're changing that practice.
Okay, But in this particular case, Dr. Joel Beitelman was originally assigned to the HR department, wasn't he?
He was never assigned to HR.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Councilmember Sales.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to pick up on the question that I left off on. How long is the complaint process and how many in the, is it DCI? How many complaints is the DCI managing since you began in October?
As of last Friday, there are a total of 210 open matters in DCI.
And how many staff are overseeing that along with you?
The entire staff is 12, and as far as those who are equipped and experienced with investigations, it would be 9, myself and 4 coordinators and 4 investigators.
Okay, and what's the average time to resolve a case?
When I started at DCI, there was no timing, there was no assignment or tracking. Complaints can vary. It may...
On average, what is the time frame?
I cannot provide an average time frame.
How many have you closed since you've been here, since October?
I would have to get back to you with that number.
Okay. As one of my colleagues mentioned, it's important to have a process for checks and balances in place. A lot of the concerns speak to DCI and a lot of things that are falling through the cracks. Who's evaluating DCI who's measuring or evaluating your work, your department? Who oversees your department and your work?
Chief Key and the COO and core leadership.
Okay, so when complaints are filed on internal staff, how are those complaints handled, Mr. Hull?
It would depend on the type of complaints that are filed. It could be an investigation. Of course, it wouldn't be, if it was a complaint about DCI, it would not be DCI that would investigate. It could be an outside hearing officer, or it
investigates complaints made against DCI.
So it could be an outside investigator that we would bring in, or
who is this contracted that would handle these complaints, and how often have complaints been made against DCI?
I guess I'm not. Are you talking about currently?
I'm talking about. However, I'm not sure how long complaints. I'd say since this investigation period, since 2020, how many complaints have been made against DCI?
I don't have that in front of me, but we can follow up.
Okay. And then when a complaint is made against DCI, who is resolving that complaint? Who's contracted, or how many contractors?
Complaints are usually submitted by someone who is complaining about the treatment they receive from another person. Okay. So not necessarily a department.
Well, this report is talking about complaints within DCI. DCI does not have a comprehensive policy for conducting and documenting investigations. DCI does not follow defined criteria when determining what actions to take with complaints.
So DCI is the department that addresses complaints.
Yes. So who is evaluating or overseeing DCI?
I oversee DCI.
Okay. And so how are you evaluating complaints against the department? Any deficiencies?
I deal with complaints based on individuals, and I haven't received a complaint about DCI as a whole.
None whatsoever?
None. Not one.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you. Councilmember Balcom.
Thank you. And I want to thank everybody for being here. And I know that this is stressful, particularly when we're trying to hurry up with our 5 minutes. So I appreciate the time, and particularly Ms. Ormsby for stepping into this role at this very critical time. So I really appreciate that. And I think when we look at unpacking this, we looked at the HR process, the flaw in looking at promoting people who are currently being investigated and not having that information. We looked at the complaint process and that not being sufficient. But then we also looked at the oversight responsibility and that not being adequate. And I just wanted to piggyback on what Councilmember Glass mentioned, and Albornoz to begin with is you know, we need transparency. It's frustrating for the council when we have very little control other than budgetary to be expected to have this accountability without having that transparency. But I also think that from the board's perspective, when we look at the board, it's an impossible task to ask the board to oversee a budget as large as you do, and then to oversee everything about the school system. So I do want to echo what my colleagues have said about expecting a part-time board to do a full-time task. And so I just wanted to associate myself with those remarks. But I do want to go back to something that somebody said earlier about building trust with the employees. Because this system has been broken for so long, there are people out there who have made anonymous complaints or not anonymous complaints that haven't been followed through. I think that the school system owes them a chance to for you to publicly acknowledge that that the system has let them down, and to invite them to resubmit their complaints with the full trust and understanding that you are going to do something with that. And I think that of all the times that we have people watching, this is probably going to be one of the most watched council hearings. So for those of you out there, employees out there who have lodged complaints, who have not been answered, please resubmit those your complaints. We need to know, and please give the system a chance to address those complaints. We are losing people. We're losing good people, and we need to make sure that we instill this trust. And if you don't get a response, please contact the council. We want to make sure that this happens. I appreciate the acting superintendent for being here, and all of you, Ms. Keys and Mr. Hull. So thank you all, and that's it.
Thank you. Mr. Hull, we just want to go back to one thing to make sure, to see if you want to clarify the record on something. I'm going to turn to the Council Vice President. Council President.
Yeah, thanks. So the question about one of my colleagues was about Joel Beidelman and being assigned to Office of Human Resources. He was on the website, unassigned within the Office of Human Resources. I have 9 messages of screenshots. I had already seen it previously. I just want to give an opportunity to correct the record on
The
that.
record is correct. He was never in OHRD. He never served any time in our office. Just as Mr. Hull had said, HR is the place where we go to put people unassigned. So his name appears there, but he was assigned to administrative leave at his house.
Okay, with all due respect, I think that's exactly what my colleague was asking, specifically someone assigned to the Office of Human Resources, not to do any work, but to be assigned to the office. So the response, while technically perhaps accurate, was not in keeping with what the question was and what the concern is. So I just want to reiterate, this is the accountability and transparency question and issue at the heart of what we're trying to talk about here. So I'm not trying to jump down your throat here or to catch you in saying something, but anybody who is watching this, if they watch that exchange and then they look at a screenshot that shows an individual who is unassigned to the Office of Human Resources that was specifically at the heart of the question that the council member was asking, clearly would beg the question of whether or not there is a forthrightness here that is occurring. and would call into question all the other answers to all the other responses that we have. So we have to do better. I just want to be very clear. We have to do better, and it shouldn't require screenshots and people sending us messages while we're on the dais to correct the responses to questions. The goal here should be to get to the bottom of what happened, to be open and honest about what happened, to talk about how we're fixing the problems, and to move forward together. And with the unredacted report earlier and you know the late change to that with this response to this question, it demonstrates that there needs to be more work done on the cultural changes that are necessary in order to have the type of transparency and accountability that all of us expect, and I know all of us agree that is necessary. So with that, let me yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Hull, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I would apologize if we misunderstood the question. Often people are reassigned to HR on a special assignment, and they're doing HR work in HR, and that is what I was referencing as far as a practice that we're moving away from. My understanding, and I'll ask Ms. Key to correct me if I'm incorrect, but when someone is placed on administrative leave, they've got to be placed somewhere in the system, and so just kind of by default, they would appear in the HR area, but that doesn't, in this case and in other cases, would not mean that they're reporting to HR, doing HR work, or in any way affiliated with HR. It just, in our system, that's kind of where they're put.
Thank you. We probably have a number of questions that were raised today that were not asked, and I know colleagues have other questions. We will be sending over some questions like we did earlier this week and ask for written responses. In terms of next steps, before we close out today, we have, as the Inspector General mentioned, she will be meeting with MCPS and the board. I believe you're getting another update at the board on April 23rd. We will have another joint Audit and EC Committee session soon after that. And I'm going to turn it over now to Councilmember Chair Jawando for his final remarks, and then I'll close this out.
Thank you for mentioning that, and thank you all for coming. I know this is not super comfortable. I appreciate Councilmember Balcom saying, with the 5 minutes as well, it makes it a little more, but we had to manage the time, and thank you for your help there. As Chair Stewart said, we're going to follow up at the 90-day point, but the E&C Committee, as I've communicated to the board, President, and MCPS, are going to be following up on the policy and substantive issues in between and all around those times too. We're going to get through the budget, so we're going to partner with you on scheduling that. As we said, we didn't get into this overnight. It's going to take time to make sure we get out of it. I'll start from where I began. This is a great school system. That we're not perfect, and we have significant problems in this area. But I put my kids on the bus this morning knowing they were going to their teachers and administrators who care about them, who want them to do well, and who work hard for them every day. So to the 25,000 employees, to all of the staff, I want to say thank you. We are a big operation, and we have to do better. There's a lot of things that came up in this over these last several months. Sometimes it takes a huge shakeup like this to improve. And I really appreciate also, I want to reiterate, the board's commitment and I often say for the millions watching at home, I think that we have that today. If you have a complaint, if something has happened to you, report it. Come to the DCI and to the anonymous or to the Guardian system once it's up, to the IG, wherever, come and make that complaint known. If it's a previous complaint, check on it, and if you haven't heard anything about it, re-up it. We are all focused on this, and we want you to feel safe, and that goes for our students and our faculty and staff. I know we can do this, and we're partners with you in this work, and I appreciate those who have stepped up and taken these jobs at a time where it's very difficult. And so we're going to work with you. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It won't be easy. As I tell my kids, often the easy thing is the wrong thing. The hard thing is the right thing. And so we're going to have to do that together. So thank you, and look forward to following up. And I'll turn back to Co-Chair Stewart. I want to thank her for her stewarding of this meeting.
Thank you very much. The closing remarks, I just want to say thank you to everyone who came today, and also join my colleagues and expressing our need to move forward. And also to those who are our educators, our families out there who have been harmed by this, and our community. They were failed in many ways, and as we move forward, we will do better. We will provide the stability they need in their schools, because the schools are the heart of our community. If there's instability in our schools, there's instability in our community. And so this is something we all have to work towards. And I just want to thank Ms. Lamarzi for the excellent work that you did on this, and your incredible professionalism through all this. This was not easy to do at the level that you did it. And you have done such a great service to our community and to our county. And I thank you for that, and I'm looking forward to your continued work on it. And your work on this is honestly what gives me hope that we are actually going to be able to move this forward and do it in a transparent and accountable way. So thank you very much. I want to thank President Silvestri for coming today, and the entire board. As has been stated, these are not full-time jobs. This is a lot of work on the part of each of you, both emotionally and physically and intellectually. And so thank you for doing this. President Silvestri, thank you for your remarks today. And we look forward to continuing the work together. Interim Superintendent Felder, some welcome you have. But again, we want to work with you as we work together to fix these issues. And Mr. Hull, I don't know if I gave you a doctorate before, but I might have. Mr. Hull, Ms. Keys, and Ms. Ormsby, thank you for your work. You are on the front lines of this. And I think probably more so than any of us, because you see those complaints, you are talking to our students, our educators, who are the victims and need assistance. So you know, probably better than any of us, how important it is that we get this right. And so I, again, look forward to working with all of you. Thank you for your time today, and thank you for everyone who joined us, and we will continue. We're adjourned.